recording. It's FIDE Master John Curtis here. I'm doing a special tribute tonight to Keith Farrell. Now you might say, well, who is Keith Farrell? Well, he's one of the most important chess players you could ever meet in your life. You might think, oh, well, is he a world chess champion, or is he a grandmaster? No, he's none of those things. He's one of the most important people that the chess community has, and that is he's an avid chess administrator. Right, so we sometimes forget those people that tirelessly and selflessly give to their chess community. So I want to give a special tribute to Keith Farrell for services to New South Wales chess. I'm going to have a look at a few of Keith Farrell's games, and we're going to be particular. We're going to look at the Australian Minor Championships in 1999. 3 games he played. They're not brilliancies or anything, but we'll analyse the games in the spirit of things, and we'll have a look at Keith's games. What can I say about Keith? Well, Keith Farrell was president of the Gosford Chess Club between 1999 and 2021, which is a long period of service. In 2016, as I say, he was awarded the Gary Koshnitsky Medal for services by the Australian Chess Federation, services to chess administration, both on a state and national level. What else can I say about young Keith? Everyone loves him. Isn't it amazing? Eh? He's one of the most cherished players that we've got in Australia, and he's loved by everybody, as I say. And I want to wish a special Merry Christmas to Keith Farrell, who I visited today. He's a little Central Coast hamlet. Right, and so without further ado, we're going to get into the games. And I've chosen his first game, round 2 from the Australian Minor Championship, which was held at the then beloved location of Keith up in Mingara, the Mingara Club, the Mingara Sports and Recreation Centre on the beautiful New South Wales Central Coast, just over an hour north of Sydney. Right, and so here we go, game 1. We're looking at Keith Farrell White. He's playing Tomislav Bonjekovic, right? And so we'll get into that game. I hope we can get it up all right. Can we see that on the board? Yes, we can just about see it. We might have to make a small adjustment. Yep, close that. We'll just get that small adjustment up there. We might have to lift it a little bit. Make sure that you can see that board. Right, you can't. What a bugger. Okay, so here we go. There, got it. Right. Okay, right, I think I've got it. And now we're on our way. Forgive me for that, technical difficulties. Right, so here we go. It's clearly labelled Keith Farrell versus Tomislav Bonjekovic. What's the opening? It's a Sicilian Alapin's variation. Let's have a look and see what happens. Keith's white. E4 was played, and C5. C3, that's the mark of the Sicilian Alapin. B6. Obviously, black, what he's looking at is, you would think he was preparing to play bishop to B7, which looks like a logical move to attack the E pawn. Okay, so what goes on? D4. Okay, so D4 was played. Logical move supported by the C pawn, gaining the centre. Okay, E6. And this looks like another logical move. It just develops the black bishop with knight e to castling. There is a problem. Black's played, 1, 2, 3 moves, and he hasn't moved a minor piece. And that, as I say in many of my videos, to my lectures to beginners, and that is, you're supposed to get your knights out early and with a view to castling. Okay, let's see what takes place. Okay, so Keith correctly develops his knight. Now he only now has to move his white squared bishop on f1, and then he'll be ready to castle. Let's see what happens. Black plays bishop e7. Well, remember that rule, knights before bishops. Will Black be punished for his bad play? I like the idea of d5 here as white if I was having to choose a move. But then again, let's see what Keith does. Well, Keith just develops a piece. Keith's thinking very clearly. And Keith's at his best. He's a very dangerous player. He's played bishop to f4. So he's developed a knight, developed a bishop. And you can't really dispute that as just being a good system. Right, d6. Okay, so what does Keith do now? Well, he plays bishop to e2 and he's prepared to castle. And Keith probably wants to get a good result, being the tournament being the Australian Minor Championship. And he's hoping probably to get his 50% or better, which I'm sure most players would like to have in the tournament. So, what's this now? Bishop a6, he was challenging the bishop. Now that doesn't look right, does it? You'd think a normal move would be bishop b7. Now how do you exploit this? Can you see what Keith did here? Right? This is for beginners mainly. We're not talking about master players. We're talking about beginners. Well, Keith took the bishop. And the knight recaptured and check. Oh no, so Black loses a piece. The queen is attacking the king and it's attacking the knight. Queen to d7 is placed and queen takes knight. Okay, so white's just a clear piece up. And the lesson here for beginners is develop your pieces carefully. Don't try to get too much out of the opening, but just prepare to develop your minor pieces carefully. Make sure all your pieces are connected together, coordinating. And the other thing that you've got to watch is examine all checks and examine all captures. Now, those were the rules that unfortunately Tomislav had failed to adhere to in his game. But he might be a new player and might be on the up and coming. He might be a grandmaster today, or I don't know. I've never heard of Grandmaster Tomislav Bonjekovic, but I haven't followed his career closely. Okay, pawn takes pawn. Knight to f6, that's a good move. Finally, he's developing his pieces. Will he cause trouble? Knight to c3. No. Keith hasn't gone astray. He's playing logically. He castles, and he castles too. So both players have castled. Let's have a look at the position. Failing Black's idea of losing that piece, which he didn't see, he's still got 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns, and Keith has got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns as well. So Keith is one clear whole piece up. So one would think that you would try to eliminate some of the minor pieces. Let's see what Keith does. Rook on the A file to C8, played by Tomislav Bonjekovic, and rook to D1. Well, there we go. Now, I can see the purpose of this could be E5, but White also had the option of challenging on the C file, protecting his knight, but there are no threats to White in the position. Queen to d8. I suppose he's just waiting and hoping for a mistake, so he might get his piece back. And Keith correctly just pushes the pawn forwards in the centre. Knight goes to h4. Now, what would you do here? Would you retreat your bishop? What would you do? Well, bishop e3 looks like a good move because it does threaten, if you play bishop to e3 in this position, it does threaten g4 wins a piece, right? That's right. It threatens g4 wins a piece. The bishop to e3 looks like a good move. However, this is what was played. He saw the opportunity to exchange pieces. So Black captured the knight on f4 and Keith took the bishop. And you can't really fault that play because Keith managed to, without any risk to himself, he's exchanged the pieces off and he's still got 5, 6, 7 pawns 6 pawns against his opponent's 6 pawns. The only difference is he's got an isolated D pawn, but it's not under attack. Rook in the A file to C1. This is a very logical move by Keith, and he's moved the correct rook there too. Some players, when they're beginners, they do make that mistake of, which rook do I put on that file? It's a semi-open file. What we mean by that is that there are no pawn. It's an open file. There's no pawns on that file. So it's an open file. They're both challenging the open file. Sometimes you can get some real fireworks on there. And I'll show you what happened during the game where some fireworks could have occurred. So Queen to B4 is played, and now Keith just protects his B pawn with Rook to D2. Rook to C7 is played. Now Keith doubles the rooks, and Keith has correctly identified that in this particular position, the pieces can be just doubled up and challenge the C file, because black's really not threatening anything. The knight can't penetrate. By playing to D3, because the queen is covering the square. The queen on A6 is covering the D3 square. It's covering the E2 square. So the knight on F4 really has nowhere to go at present. And we'll see what takes place. Well, he's doubled his rooks. Now, this move is dangerous. I'll show you why. In this position, white can actually play knight to D5. Right? I know it looks ridiculous, but knight to D5 can be played. Yeah, and if white played knight to D5, if the knight takes the knight, looks like everything's protected, but the queen could take the rook with check on C8. And when rook takes rook, rook takes rook check, the queen must come back to F8, and white would win comfortably. So knight to D5 seems to be a winning move, right? If you play rook takes rook after knight to D5, well, again, queen takes rook would check would lead to mate. After rook takes queen, rook takes rook check, and knight intervenes. So queen intervenes on F8, and knight to E7 check, king to H8, and queen takes queen checkmate on the F8 square. Okay, can you see that one? Well, I haven't got the arrows on this particular system. G3 is played, so he's missed the knight to D5 combination move, but he correctly, being a piece up, and it is a correct idea, he can see that the knight on F4 hasn't really got a good square, because if it goes to D5, he can play knight takes knight anyway, and knight takes knight would win. So, and not only that, he's given an escape square for his king, so there's no back rank threats to the white position. The knight goes to H5, and that's a poor knight. Knight to G6 would have been superior. In this position, it's knight G6 would have stopped any black rank mate threats, but he's chosen knight to H5. So knight to D5 here, again, would be a winning move. Knight to D5. You can't play pawn takes knight because a queen takes rook check. Have a look at that again very slowly. If white plays knight to D5, it attacks the queen and the castle. Now, if black played rook takes rook after knight to D5, right? Well, white can play queen takes rook check. That's right, and sacrifice the queen for the rook, but he gets the queen back because the rook must take, recaptures with a rook, and the queen must go into F8 And then again, the same system happens because of blacks or weak back rank. Okay. Now he didn't see it. He didn't see knight to d5. So Keith is not the master yet, but he's on the improve. He's always trying hard. In local chess, Keith had always, I say this in a very, very fond way of Keith, he would often give up of his time. He'd be playing in the tournament and trying to direct the tournament at the same time. You know how hard that is? So he would sacrifice some of his games because he's concentrating more on directing the tournament, getting the draw right, making sure all the players are happy and everything else. So he gives so much of his time to others. Very noble indeed. That's why we honour him. He played knight to f6, Tomislav. Now a6. Now knight to d5 wasn't playable in that position. So a3 is played, queen to a5. And now what do we do? Well, knight to e4. Keith sees an opportunity to do a face-off. Yes, a face-off between the rooks on the open file and the threat of knight takes knight check. So now rook takes rook is threatened and knight takes knight check is threatened. So black's next move is probably forced. Knight there he plays. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, knight takes. And now black's still hoping that he can just get a draw somehow. So queen to c4. Black's actually done quite well when you consider that at the beginning of the game he blundered that piece. That was probably just a little bit of inexperience on Tomislav Bonjekovic's account. Right, so we're, b5 is played. Oh, and Keith now, he suddenly starts to penetrate. He sees that back rank and he wants to play queen to d7 and queen to d8 with a checkmate. So he wants to penetrate the position. So, h6 is a bolt hole, as we call it. But that stops the check on the back rank. So the queen gets a bit closer to that check. It's starting to look dangerous. So what does black play? f6. Aha, so he's found another defensive move. And now the knight's coming closer towards his king. Now, this is a problem. Oh, the queen slips back, trying to offer some defence. It's like calling a horse race, isn't it? I like knight to h4 in this position. I do like it, but let's see what Keith does. Well, he just plays a queen check. Looks like a great move. And is he going to follow with knight to e8? What's his plan? Well, the king moves to h7. Well, here comes the move. He's protecting his knight. Now, he could be in time trouble at this stage. Could be in time trouble. Might be a bit of a time scramble, as we call it. Now, the queen's hitting the knight. It's a sneaky move. Oh, the knight goes up. There we go. Knight goes up to h4. g5 could be played here, but the check is too powerful on f7. So if you play g5, queen to f7 would be a checkmate. King back to h8 and knight checkmates on g6. So I'm sure Keith saw that one. Now, he wants to change queens. He's thinking, oh, well, I'm going to lose a pawn. Queen takes queen, knight takes, and knight takes b5. But Keith says no. He says, I like the king. He says, your king looks like it's in trouble. And he sees that big check on g6. So the queen moves over. He checks him on g6. King goes back. Knight hits queen. And now what happens? Well, queen there. Knight takes pawn check. You can't recapture with the g-pawn because the pawn's pinned, but you're in check with the knight. And the queen's attacked. Let's see what happens. Queen there. And now look at this move. That's a very good chess move. What he's saying is you can take my knight on h6 and have a weakened pawn structure, but I will recapture your knight on c7. So what do you say about that, buddy? Okay, he takes the knight. Well, knight to d5 was a better move, but queen takes knight now, and Keith is just taking advantage. I think Keith's got a little bit more experience than our friend Tomislav, and because Tomislav has showed a few potential good ideas, but he's got very weak pawn structure, and losing that piece early shows there is a bit of lack of experience in there. King there, a little check, and now the position starts to fall apart. Queen takes, king up, up, pawn up, and now this is just really just a little bit of common sense by white not to do anything silly. And now he's moving his knight over there, gives him a check, king goes back, knight check again, king back, pawn takes pawn. Now you can't take the knight, because if you take the knight in this position, white would just take the pawn and have two passed pawns, right? And that's a clear win. So what, he recaptures the pawn, hoping Keith would leave the knight there. It might be a time scramble. King there, knight there hits another pawn, and king comes up and knight takes pawn. King there, he's making a run for it again. There he goes, knight, king there, knight checks, king there, and now king to d3. And now black sees that he can't push the pawn onto a6 to go for a queen, because the knight will just capture it. And we have the h pawn here. You see the h pawn? It's free to run all the way there, down there for a queen. King goes back, pawn forwards, he starts pushing for a queen, and it's with that that Tomislav Bonjekovic resigned and Keith Farrell was a winner. And now we're going to go back to another game now. We're going to go for game 2. We're going to look at one of Keith's losses. I think it's always good to have a look at someone's losses, because I think even Keith will acknowledge that in round 4 of the same tournament, he played his old mate Norman Greenwood. Now, Norman Greenwood too has done his share of chess administration in his lifetime. Old Norman Greenwood's very, very loved. He used to play for North Sydney, which is just on the other side of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, North Sydney Leagues Club there. And Norm played there for many years, and he's most loved in the community too. And he's certainly done his share of chess administration. So that's why I chose that game, because I know Keith and Norman Greenwood, they both have a lot of affection for each other in chess, right? So, right, so here we go. So we're going to look at the game Norman Greenwood. And up comes the board, and we'll remember to do the adjustment here so you can all see it. Make sure you can see the board clearly. I'll just do one little bit more of an adjustment. Just a little bit more, and I'm sure you can see the board quite clearly. That's better. Okay, so here we go. We've got round 4. This opening is called the Stonewall. And this is a very good opening. It's the Queen's Pawn Stonewall attack. You can see that just under the names of the two players, Norman Greenwood and Keith Farrell. Keith is black, as you can see. Okay, d4. And this Stonewall system is very solid openings, very sneaky. And it makes it very, very hard for a lot of beginner players to know how to combat it, right? To combat the simple plan of launching a kingside attack. And Norman Greenwood does this very well in this game. And I think Keith becomes a bit frustrated with Norm's play, because Norm plays it so well. E3, knight f6, particularly good move. Bishop d3. Okay, now in this position, black could easily just play bishop g4, right? Bishop g4. And hit the queen, and that probably might be the best way to play this position. Just get that bishop out. In a lot of these queen pawn type openings where white plays the queen's pawn type openings, it's very important to get that bishop on c8 out. So bishop g4 does look like the move for black in this position, but he plays e3. Now this is a problem. This is a real problem, and Norm Greenwood really makes Keith pay for this. He makes him pay heavily. Let's see what he does. He plays knight b5 to d2. Now already black's looking at the book position. He can't play knight to e4. Black can't play e5, And the only move he's got is c5. Let's see what he does. Bishop e7. Well, he prepares to castle. He says, oh, I don't know what you're doing, Norm. He says, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm just going to castle and do the logical chess moves and see what happens. But Norm plays this move, f4, the mark of the Stonewall attack. And it's exactly what the name infers. It's a stone wall, and you've got to try to get through it. And it's a problem. It's a real problem, especially if black just plays passively. Okay, so knight b5 to d7. Keith is, or if you look at Keith's position, I mean, Keith has followed a lot of the rules of chess. Perhaps the best way to play this after Keith's logical move would be to follow up as black with b6, followed by bishop b7. Can you see that? So b6, this is for black, then followed up by bishop b7 if you give it enough time, and then play knight to e4 and try to fight for that e4 square, if you're given a chance to do it. Let's see what takes place. So knight to f3 is played. Now, as I say, I recommend b6 here as probably the only really active way to challenge White's game. He castled. Now already it may be too late. Castles by White. Rook to e8. And that's a passive move, because notice the bishop on c8's a real problem. He hasn't addressed the problem of the bishop on c8. And not only that, the white bishop on d3 is aiming at the king side, the black king side. There's a white knight coming in on e4, and that'll release the queen, the queen and the castle to come into some sort of attack. Anyway, let's see how Norman Greenwood proceeds with his ideas. Knight to e5. Okay, so now we can see if knight takes knight, the f pawn would recapture, and White would easily be able to play queen to h5, and maybe even bishop takes pawn check, and it'd be a real battle. So if knight takes knight, f pawn takes. If knight d7, well, White could actually play bishop takes pawn check, for king takes, queen to h5 check, king goes back to g8, queen takes f7 check, king moves to the file, and rook to f3. It looks like it's amazing attack. So it looks bad. c5 is played. Well, what would be the logical move in this position? Black's threatening to try to cause c4. Black would love to play c4 and chase that bishop off the d3 square. So what does Norm do? Plays c3 and make sure his white squared bishop, right, is still trained on the king. And that's a good move. c5, now that blocks the black position up, if anything, and now White just slips his bishop back correctly. So Norman Greenwood is playing flawless chess at this stage. And Keith's just suffering a lot because of those just those few passive moves. And look at the bishop on c8 for black. Remember I told you about that. Here we go, g4. Now, the whole idea of g4 in this position is to play g5. Yes, attack the defending knight to the king position, and then you may be able to play bishop takes pawn check, queen to h5 check, queen takes f7 check, and rook to f3 with a mating attack. Yes, that's right. I'll do it again for you slowly. If it was White to move in this position, White plays g5, right? And there's nowhere for the knight to go. So you just win a pawn. That's the beginning of the end of the position. Anyway, h6 is played. Norm says, I don't care, I'm coming to get you. And now Keith is really not sure about what's going on. He doesn't like it, right? Because the knight hasn't really got a great square. The only square that the knight seems to have is h7. But white can actually play knight takes f7. White can play knight takes f7, attacking the queen, and if the king takes, bishop takes knight, right? So it's a real problem. He's really under the pump here with the white bishop on c2, attacking that long diagonal. The knight on e5 is performing a task, and the rook on f1 is attacking the f pawn on f7, the weakest square on the board, and the queen on d1 is ready to launch over to h5. Okay, pawn takes pawn by Keith. Pawn recaptures, and now Keith has to make a decision. Where does he put his knight? And he can see the f7 square's a real mess. So he plays knight takes knight. He thinks, well, my best chance is to try to confuse the guy. And we'll see what takes place. Pawn takes knight. Well, there we go. And now, after that, the king looks a bit shot. Knight to d3. He wants to block the bishop off at all costs. So Keith's got some ideas here. If Keith could get in e5 and get a little bit of play, well, then maybe he can just survive. So he's trying to survive the position. And he hasn't lost a piece or anything. It's just that the attack looks pretty ferocious. Anyway, let's see what takes place. b3. Well, there we go. White's trying to undermine those pawns. Now, you can't take the pawn on b3 because the bishop would take the knight, and the attack would be relaunched against the black king. So let's see what takes place. e5. So Keith is trying to free his game. Finally, that bishop on c8 that we spoke about in the earliest part of the game. We spoke about that bishop being blocked with that e3 move in the first few moves of the game, and cementing that that Stonewall defence, which virtually crushed any opportunity of black developing his queenside. So now Keith's trying to break out, but unfortunately White's attack is already pretty strong, and the pieces look poised to attack the black king. Now e5 is played. He's still trying to block that bishop at all costs. Queen to h5. He says, all right, I'll just go over there. I'm threatening queen takes d pawn. I'm also threatening, this is what he says, I'm also threatening pawn takes g7, followed by queen takes pawn check on f7. Right, can you see that? Right. So rook e6 is played, and now simply queen takes pawn. And as you can see in the position, that the real problem with the position is there's a massive pawns in the middle. White's lost too many pawns, and there could be a pawn storm coming into the black position. Queen takes, pawn takes rook, and now can you see that knight on d3? It looks horrid. Right, rook there, and now knight takes pawn. He's moved his rook to the wrong square, and now unfortunately there's a tempo there, right? Knight takes rook is threatened, and bishop takes knight. So he took the bishop, and he took the rook. Now, in this position, a knight check, that's logical. Maybe if he moves to the wrong square, but he doesn't. He attacks the knight. So now, White's got the exchange, and he's threatening knight takes bishop and king takes knight. So black has to do something. He plays knight, he moves his knight, and now knight takes bishop. And it's with that the position now is a bit clearer, and we can see that White's got a wonderful game. Rook takes knight, pawn takes pawn. He further weakens that king side. Bishop to d6. Now that's an interesting move. It goes with the h pawn. And now bishop b3, he holds the all-important d pawn. If White could play e4 and e5, the game's over, basically. That's what it boils down to. There's a check there. He's hoping that white will make a mistake and play king forwards, and then there'll be a knight check and black's back in the game. But no, Norman Greenwood was a bit too smart for that. But Keith tried, didn't he? Keith was very creative. Knight forks, that forks the rook and the bishop, but taking the bishop's not really a worry. Rook to c1, he says, well, just challenge rooks. Now, what he could have done was he could have moved the other rook there in that position, the rook on a1, right? Rook on a1 to c1 might have been better. But again, there could have been a time scramble, and I can't see that. Rook there, rook to c3, so the pawn's held. Oh, he played rook there. Well, knight there looks a lot more natural than that move, but still, we'll see what happens. H3 is played. I can't. Oh, he wants to stop the check. He's a bit concerned about the check. Fair enough. Right, and now we've got rook to h5. Well, it doesn't achieve much. Bishop to d1. Norm's trying to finish this game off now. He really wants to trap the rook by playing bishop to g4. And the rook retreats. The rook, finally, he's got the open file. He says, that's my file, I'll take that. And now rook checks. Now, the minor pieces are causing a bit of trouble here. Now, bishop to g4. Now, it's in this position. White can play pawn to bishop 4. Right? Pawn to bishop 4 and pin the bishop against the king. Can you see that? So black should play here pawn to f5, attacking the white bishop. And perhaps black's back in the game. It's not clear, is it? Okay, let's see what took place. Knight to e5. Well, that allows the check. And now, after king there, the king can go to f3, and now white's not concerned about that pawn pin anymore. There's a check, the king goes back, knight goes there, and now what's played? What's the move? Rook here. And it's with that white can't see any way to defend the position. He knows the other rook's going to go down the back as well, down to c8. And that was the end of the game. So, because after all, in this position, white's got 2, 4, 5 pawns against 3, and he's got the exchange up. See, in effect, he's about 5 points in front. I'm going to finish quickly now with one more game from Keith. So I'm going to go back here to the tournament, and we're going to look at the game. The final game is round 6. It's against Les Porter. Poor old Les Porter. He's always trying to play chess, and he was always battling old Les Porter. Not a young fella. This is the Guico pianos played. Les Porter's white and Keith Farrell's black. Okay, so it's Les Porter. Where's Les Porter? Oh, there he is, Les Porter and Keith Farrell. And Keith Farrell seems to win this game pretty quickly. So it'll be a short game. It's a Guico piano. Here we go. E4, E5. Knight to F3. Knight to C6. Bishop C4. Just check that you can see the position clearly, and you can. I'm just going to adjust the names for you a little bit. Okay, here we go. Bishop C5. Good move by Keith. And now the position's equal. Maybe a slight advantage to white having the first move, but white's done all the right things. A6. Now that's just an interesting move, but we wonder why. Why would you make a move like that? Normally in these types of positions, white would look at C3 with the idea of D4 or just castle. So A3 is a bit of a quiet move, but he's responded to by H6. Perhaps Keith is thinking, well, because you played A3, and in a lot of variations, you want to play knight to G5 if you get the opportunity, and you can cause black some discomfort. Well, I'll play H6 first. And now d3 is played. Well, the position is very level, but black seems to have done a few more correct things than white, but not much. There's not much difference in the position. I'd say it's probably fairly, might be still an advantage to white, but it'd be only small. d6, a logical move, develops the bishop on c8. Remember that last game? We remember that last game where the bishop on c8 never came out against that Stonewall defence. This is a different type of game, this Guico piano. There's the Guico piano and the Guico pianissimo. They're very, very romantic types of openings. c3, right. Knight to f6, develops a piece, so he's got all his minor pieces working. Castles. I thought b4 was more logical in the position, but however, castles is okay. Castles. Well, I thought a5 might have been a little bit better, or a6, but h3. Now, yes, he doesn't want the bishop to go to g4. Well, that's a fair cop. I can't really say that that's bad, right? I can't say it's good either, though. That's the problem. That's the problem. A6, h6 is played. A6. So black can retreat his bishop back to the a7 square, if necessary. b4 comes, and then yeah, that's exactly what he does. He slips it back in the corner. So Keith wants that lovely long diagonal for his bishop to cause white long-term problems. This bishop on a7 right down to that weakest square on the board. We all know the weakest square on the board is the f2 square. Okay? Right. Now, white's got some ideas here. White could play rook to a2. You could do that. You could just play knight on the b file to d2. His position's still fairly solid. It's not easy to get in there. Let's see what white does. Bishop to b7. Well, that's okay if you can get the d4 move in, I suppose. You'd eliminate some of white's practices. Bishop d7. Now, that's a logical move, but doesn't cause too many problems. Now, knight e7 was a follow-up. Now, this is interesting. Where the hell is black going? He's moving his pieces backwards. Now, Keith, I thought your pieces were supposed to go forwards. Anyway, let's see what happens. Bishop b3. Well, d4 might have been a better move, because the bishop was on b2 with the idea of protecting the pawn on c3, and that would protect the d4 move. Say white to play d4 might have been a better move than bishop back. So they're playing it quiet. That's what the Guico piano is often known as the quiet game. Okay, so knight to g6. Now black's looking at infiltrating with the knight on g6, the one that's just moved, to knight to f4. So he's just trying to come in a little bit closer with his minor pieces around the white king. Because white's playing a little bit passively, and Keith is starting to see a few little holes. Let's have a look and see what takes place. So now this move is played. Well, that move could have been played last move without moving the bishop back to b3. Okay? Because in some variations, the bishop might have been required to go back to d3. So why move the bishop before playing d4? Anyway, queen to c8 is played. Now you would think, oh, that looks like a silly move. What's that? It seems it blocks the rook in the corner. And hold on, but is he threatening bishop takes h3? See how the queen and the white squared bishop both are aligned to the pawn on h3, white's king h3 square. So bishop takes pawn would be a real big threat, because that'd smash open the king. And let's see what took place. So the knight goes back. Now, this is interesting. What would you play in this position? Well, Keith just said, well, I'm playing knight forwards. What are you going to do about that? Well, you can't play g3 and chase it away with the g3 move because of a knight to h3 check. So that knight is like a real sore thumb in your position, okay? g4, well, poor old Les Porter, he's panicked. He's panicked. And he's thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll cut off that bishop. But then he's forgotten, poor old Les, he's forgotten about his h-pawn, right? And here it comes, knight takes pawn check. And now with that, the white king's pretty busted up, isn't it? So the king hits the knight, gives him a check, and he says, oh no, what are you going to do now? I'm threatening knight takes g-pawn. So he goes up and he protects it. He protects it. He protects it. He thinks, well, I've got to protect that pawn at any cost. And now this is what Keith does. Look at this. Pawn there. That's right. He just plays pawn there and tries to open up the king because the king's sitting on g3. What does Keith see that his opponent can't see? Well, he pushes the pawn on the knight. Now here, Keith comes up with an idea. Can you see what Keith's idea might be? The bishop hits the castle, right? So the castle's attacked. The one on f1. And you think, oh, do I take the knight? Oh, I might take my castle. Do I move my rook? What do I do? And then he misses something. He pushed the pawn against the bishop to chase the bishop away, and he forgot about the queen coming in. That's right. And the queen comes into h3, and that's checkmate. So Keith wins a very short game indeed, only 19 moves. So Keith gets a big win in round 6 of the Australian Championship Minors Division in Mingara, and that was played on the 3rd of January 2000. So I hope you all enjoyed this short presentation. It's a tribute again, as I say, to chess administrators, in particular my friend and our friend at the Central Coast Leagues Club Chess Club and the Ettalong Chess Club, the great Keith Farrell. And I say the great because, as I said earlier, and I'll repeat myself, you can be a world chess champion and you can be loved by many for your wonderful contributions to chess. But let's not forget the unsung heroes, the chess administrators, those wonderful chess administrators and chess coaches that make all these things possible. Thank you again, and that will be the end of my stream. Thumbs up if you like the video, and if you've got any suggestions, ask me. Give me your suggestions by filling in the comments column. And if you haven't subscribed, you can subscribe to my channel, and you get notifications of more videos as they become available. Okay, so right now I'm going to stop.